All right, good evening, everyone. Going to walk you through a screening example for a one-way ANOVA. This is going to be very similar to some of the screening that we worked with the independent sample t-test. Still basic means-based stuff. We're just going to add in a couple of more groups. So with these data that we're working with in class for the example, we've got a situation where, let's say we are running an experiment and we have a film intended to elicit some positive emotions, like an amusement film, but we have concerns on whether or not the validity of our stimulus is going to be the same across people from different racial ethnic backgrounds. So what we've done is we have a pilot. We've had people come in, actually got pretty decent sized samples, had participants go through, watch the film, and then had them rate emotional valence, 0 to 8, very unpleasant at 0 to 8, very pleasant, arousal, 0 being low levels of arousal, of emotional arousal, 8 being high levels of emotional arousal, and then we've separated people into white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic, and then a suboptimal everyone else category, which is not great for this type of research, but is what we have for this example. So we're going to be working with our one-way ANOVA screening worksheet and then our one-way ANOVA data set here. So I'm going to close this down, but again, this is our worksheet we'll be working through, or our handout we'll be working through with this. I'm going to start with the data here. So first thing we want to do is we want to go through and check to see if we have any missing values. Now, easy to do this in SPSS with the types of sets we have. It looks like we have 99 people here. We can very quickly, easy look for missing data by just sorting, right? So if we go right click, sort ascending, anything with a missing value would pop up on top. Sort ascending, nothing there. Sort ascending, nothing here. So we know that we have no missing values in this set, which is good news. So what we're going to do next is take a look at our univariate distributions. But again, remember that because we're running a one-way ANOVA, our goal here is to look at differences in both valence and arousal across our 3 different groups. So remember that when I'm screening groups for between subjects tests, that we need to split file first so that we get all of our results separated by group. So I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to go down to split file. I'm going to click that, and ethnicity is going to be my variable by which I'm going to organize groups. So I'm going to go through, and I'm going to hit paste to start setting up my syntax file to keep track of what I'm doing here. So we'll go ahead and bring that up here. And again, if you want to do, we can make a comment and we can say, looking at descriptives by group. Okay, and just make sure you have a space in there so that SPSS will read this. Okay, and so I'm going to go through and I'm going to split file. And now I'm going to go analyze, describe statistics, descriptive statistics down to descriptives. I'm going to want to look at valence and arousal. I'm going to drop those into my box. On options, I'm going to request skew and kurtosis. I'm going to hit continue. And then here I'm going to hit save standardized variables. Remember, this is going to calculate z-scores for us. And because we have a split file going, what this is going to do is it's going to run our z-scores using the mean and standard deviations of our groups separately, which is what we want here. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. Yeah. So separate that out. Okay, and so here's my descriptives. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to run that. And here's my output. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to make sure, recall that our valence and arousal rating should be going from 0 to 8. So I want to make sure I have plausible values in here. I know I don't have any missing values because I went through and checked that first, but it looks like for each one of my groups, all of my scores are running on this 0 to 8 scale. So it looks like I don't have any values that would be flagged as improbable. So now the other thing I'm going to do, so we go through and we can take a look at mean differences. It looks like already for valence, we're not getting too much of a mean difference across group. Maybe a little bit more for our arousal. But really what we want to look at here, at least at this stage of the game, is just giving an eyeball of our skew and kurtosis values. So here for our white non-Hispanic groups, nothing going on too much in terms of our skew values. Looks like we have some elevation in kurtosis in terms of emotional valence within my group. But again, I've got a pretty decent cell size here. Probably not going to be too worried about this, but I'm probably going to note it in my write-up as sort of something that's a feature of the data. Kurtosis for arousal isn't too bad. As we go down and we look at our black non-Hispanic participants, skew and kurtosis is looking good. For our other group, everything is looking pretty good here. So might want to take a note of, looks like maybe we have some kurtosis in our white non-Hispanic group, but again, that's probably not going to be something that we're too worried about, or is not going to raise too many concerns at least yet. So what I'm going to do now is I want to go through and request some figures. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to just sort by subject, and what that's going to do is going to take that split file off. Okay, that's an easy way to turn off my split file. I have it right here. I can turn it back on if I want, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down through to request graphs. I'm going to go at analyze, descriptives, explore, and I want to look at emotional valence and arousal, and then I'm going to label cases by subject number. Okay. This is going to go through and identify any cases that pop out on mostly our box plots, identify them by the actual subject number here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take ethnicity and I'm going to identify that as my factor list. So what this is going to do is it's going to give me descriptives and figures for emotional valence and emotional arousal by ethnicity, and then label any notable cases with a participant number here. So I'm going to go to statistics. Nope, not statistics, plots. I'm going to turn off stem and leaf, request histogram, hit continue here. Options, nothing going on there. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to hit paste. So this will send a command to my syntax file. Maybe if I'm trying to keep track of stuff here, I'm going to put in a note, say requesting graphics, okay, or let's call it, we'll say requesting plots. And again, we've turned off our split file. If I have split file on this, and I go through and run this, it'll give me a bunch of weird stuff, so make sure that you have that off. Again, I sorted, so we're going to be okay. I'm going to run this. Just going to think for a moment, and then we can go through and take a look. So again, we can see that it's split out. Looking at missing values, we already checked this, so we know we didn't have any, but we looking at 100% data for our white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic, and other for valence and emotional arousal. So that's good. We didn't lose anybody. Here's a number of different descriptives broken down by our group for valence and arousal. We've already looked at some of these, but if you need to go through and take a closer look at more in-depth descriptive statistics, you do that here. what I'm going to go through is start looking at any features of the histograms. Now, this is going to be my valence histogram for my white non-Hispanic group. And if you remember, this was the group for valence where I had maybe a little bit more elevated kurtosis. And we can see we kind of have this peak distribution with kind of a flat tails going on here, so I can see where that positive kurtosis is coming from. But things aren't looking too bad. The one thing I might note is that I've got a case that's separated and detached from the rest of the distribution. Might want to keep that, note that when I'm describing the histogram, and then keep that in mind and maybe take a look and see what's going on there. Histogram for our black non-Hispanic folks, everything's continuous part of the distribution, nothing too remarkable here. Histogram for our other group, this is kind of a sort of not a real nice normal group, but again, sample sizes, cell sizes, not as big as the others. We've got 20 people, but again, nothing too crazy going on, nothing that I would be concerned about here. Going down through and taking a look at our box plots, we see again median values for our white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic folks are similar. Median value for our other group looks to be higher in terms of valence. So again, at least in terms of median value or median level of valence, they're rating this as a little bit higher than the other two. In terms of variability, looks like similar variability for our black non-Hispanic and our other group, but much more variability in terms of our white non-Hispanic group. Remember, these whiskers go to, in this case, they're going to go to the min and the max. Min, max here, min, max here. This is your interquartile range. So just wanted to make some notes, give me a description about what's going on in that box plot, but not looking too bad. Okay. So if we go down and start taking a look at arousal, all right, for our white non-Hispanic group, that looks about as good as these data could get. Our black non-Hispanic, in terms of emotional arousal, that's looking okay as well. Nothing much going on here in terms of our other group. But then if we go down and take a look at our box plots, there's some interesting things going on here. We see in terms of at least our median-based statistics, once again, our median for our arousal looks to be identical for our white non-Hispanic and our black non-Hispanic group. Median level is a little bit higher here. Much more variability in emotional arousal for our black non-Hispanic and our other group than our white non-Hispanic group. Again, remember that here for our black non-Hispanic and our other group, we've got min, max in terms of our whiskers and our interquartile range. Our first quartile, our second quartile, and our third quartile are 25th percentile, 50th percentile are our median, our 75th percentile. But if we look, we've got some interesting things going on with our box and whisker plot here for our white non-Hispanic group. We have our median and our 75th percentile are the same value, right? This is going to be our interquartile range. And then the whiskers here are going to identify values that are most extreme values that are still falling within 1.5 times the interquartile range. Now, actually, that's not true because SPSS does something weird when it's calculating these box plots. But what it's doing is it's identifying case number 56 as a potential extreme value in that 56 has a value that falls below 1.5 times the interquartile range for the white non-Hispanic group. And then we have 3 values, looks like here a value of 6 because we're working on an ordinal scale. For 166, participant number 4, and 162, they're all falling above 1.5 times the interquartile range. But if we take a look at our histogram, it doesn't, even though these are being identified as extreme values in the box plot, It looks like that might just be because there's not a whole lot of variability going on in this. The distribution itself looks kind of normal, so we want to take all that into account. So going down through and taking a look, again, you'll want to go through and make comments, describe this. Again, we've got greatest amount of variability in our black non-Hispanic group, considerable variability in our other group, less variability in our white non-Hispanic group. We have values falling beyond 1.5 times the interquartile range, above and below, but not anything, at least, that looks too concerning based on our histograms. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we want to go through and take a look at our standardized scores. Doesn't look like we have too much of a concern about outliers, but we'll go through and take a look just the same. So I'm going to go through and say looking at outliers, something like that. Okay, and so what we want to do, remember that we went through and we calculated z-scores up here when we requested our descriptives. And when we calculated these, our split file was on. And so what it did is it went through and calculated z-scores using group level means and standard deviations. What we want to do is we want to get descriptives of those, but we want to make sure that we get those broken out by group. So again, we'll just cut and paste our split file statement. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to calculate this. So ask for descriptives. I'm not going to save anything. I don't need skew and kurtosis, so I'll get rid of that. And so here is my command. I can also just do that if I want to analyze descriptives, get those back in, ask for my z-scores, not wanting to save standardized values, turn off my skew kurtosis, continue, and paste there. And it's going to be the same thing I just pulled in here. So as you continue to get used to and familiar with this syntax, it'll often be easier to just work from this file than have to go through the pull down menu. But so I'm going to go through, I'm going to split file and then request my descriptives. I'm going to do that and then finally take a look here. So for my error. We want Z valence, Z arousal. Whoops. All right, so split file is already on. We'll just go, there we go, that's my z-scores. All right. So here, what we're looking at is our minimum and our maximum. We want to see if we have values that are falling far below the mean or far above the mean. Here, things aren't looking too bad, but we do have, for our white non-Hispanic group, someone who has a z-score that's, they have a score that's falling about 2.25 or 3.25 standard deviations below the mean. Again, if we go up and take a look at our histograms, it's probably not a huge concern overall, but want to go through and describe this case. And so this is the case that we're going to be talking about here. So if I go through and I sort by z-score for valence, I'm saying this is my case here, right? So I've got a case with a minimum of 3.25509. That's what it is here. So this is going to be case 68. Value for case 68 is going to be valence of 1, corresponding to a z-score of 3.25 or 26. So this score of 1 is falling over 3 standard deviations below the mean. Functionally, what we've got is someone who did not think our funny film was very funny at all. They actually rated this as relatively unpleasant. So what we would want to do is go through and maybe check that score, make sure that that's a valid entry. But for our screening here, would want to identify for our group, our white non-Hispanic group, we did have a single value falling over 3 standard deviations below the mean, corresponding to a score of 1 on valence, suggesting that even though we gave someone a video that was supposed to be funny, they didn't find it funny, reported it very low. Okay. Upper limit, things are all within a couple standard deviations, so we're not too worried about that. Here, for a black non-Hispanic group, valence and arousal close to or around 2 standard deviations above and below, so we're not going to be too concerned there. Same thing for our other group, within 2 standard valence within 2 standard deviations. Ethnicity, or excuse me, arousal, we've got a value that's falling a little bit below. Again, it's going to be whatever value there, but again, probably not something we're going to be too concerned about. So we've gone through, at this point, we've taken a look at missingness, we've looked at plausibility, we've looked at our distributions, we've looked at indices of skew and kurtosis, we've gone through and we've plotted our distributions, taken a look at that and have described those, and then finally taking a look at our z-scores to calculate to see if we have any outlying values. These data overall are looking pretty good in terms of our assumptions of ANOVA. Some things that we might probably flag is we do have an unbalanced design. It's not terrible, but we have twice as many people in our white non-Hispanic group as our other group. So definitely something that we'd want to take a look at. We have a low score for our white non-Hispanic group. Someone rated their valence at 1, so they didn't think that was film was very funny. We might want to go through and check that and note that score. Only other thing we'd want to do in terms of looking at our assumptions is to go through and run our homogeneity of variance test, see if we have evidence for different variances, evidence suggesting different variances across the population. If we go back up and take a look at this is our standard deviation and not our variances, but it looks like maybe some differences here. Tough to tell, but we'd have to go through and run that. So this should take you through, get you up to speed, and ready to go through and run your formal analyses. Okay? All right. Next video we'll go through and actually run that ANOVA model.